This is Political Affairs, and then we are in our second series, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are joined with two special personalities, one from Ghana and one from Nigeria. But before I introduce them, we all know what's happening in the sub region, the Sahel region, rampant coup d'etats, etc., etc. But before that, I want us to watch a video and then refresh ourselves whilst our panelists are ready for the show.
That we have all over the world to tell them to make noise, For the people here have arrested me and my family. My son is somewhere, my wife is in another place, and I'm at the residence. Right now, I'm at the residence, and nothing happening. Nothing is happening. I don't know what's going on. So I'm calling you to make noise, really. I'm thanking you.
And that's the former president. Now this is the former president of Guinea, who was toppled by Damboya. Yeah, he's in house arrest. We know he's doing well now. He's doing well. And then Damboya, who gave a very brilliant speech during the United Nations summit just this week, he was giving hell of applause. So that's Damboya. Well, okay. I think we are back, and then well, today we are joined on today's program, Political Affairs, second season, Mr. Bombande from Ghana. He is the former Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration and a peace building practitioner. Mr. Bombade, you're welcome onto the show.
Thank you so much. And
All-
if you were to permit me 30 seconds up front,
Yes.
I want to specially mention Nana and congratulate her for the spirited campaign of her party in Nigeria.
Yes.
Before we go to the subject matter, I see her to be an example of the future of hope
Yes.
that we aspire to when we talk about democracy in Africa.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Damboya. Nana just is off the system because of the network back home. But when he comes back, I will draw her attention. Then you can officially say it again. I think she's back in the studio. Nana, are you with us? Nana is gone. Okay, Mr. Damboya, I'm sorry, Mr. Bombade. Before we wait for Nana to come forth, let's begin. With the following questions. Mr. Bombade, there have been 6 successful and 2 attempted coups in West Africa since 2020.
Yeah.
Why do we have such a high number of coups in the country, sir?
Thank you so much, my good brother Martin.
Yes, sir.
If you were to include the 2 coups d'etats in Mali, and there were 2 also in Burkina Faso, the number even exceeds the 6 that you have talked about. I would point my finger to one thing. The political system has completely failed
Okay.
in terms of meeting the aspirations of the people who queue for long hours to elect their leaders. Now, these leaders have taken it for granted that because they're democratically elected, their terms or mandate is so secured that they need not pay attention. But I begin from that point to say that when you now have the triple complex of crises that influence one another, the impact of climate change, which has exacerbated farmer-herder conflicts, bad governance in terms of the abuse of human rights, and the perception or the reality of increasing corruption. And I'm sure we'll talk about that
Right.
because basically power now is seen to be at the behest of the ruling elite, whose extended and immediate family, all of a sudden are living very comfortably, whilst people are living in much more misery. And on top of that, terrorism across the Sahel. So I would put these triple issues within the context of a leadership crisis that is basically underlining why we have all of a sudden from 2020 this number of coup d'etats, which is now a contagion.
Nana came back, but the signal just went off again. Leadership crisis. Leadership crisis. I I was thinking that democratic process is the way forward. But we are seeing this leadership crisis mostly in the Francophone colonies. Why is it that, Mr. Bombade?
Thank you so much. Nana, before I respond to this, I wanted to, okay, she's gone off again.
Nana's signal is very bad, so
Very
we'll
bad.
have to wait until she comes.
Okay.
Yes,
Let me put it this way.
yes,
If you listen to a speech that Osman Sonko, the overwhelming opposition leader of Senegal, recently made, and he did it in English, he put his finger on why Francophone countries in Africa continue to suffer bad governance. It is precisely because France has never let go its former colonies. But it is not about the independence of Francophone Africa. It is the way France engages in the politics with its former colonies. It is in the intrigue and behind the scenes secrecy of anointing, endorsing, and favoring some people to be leaders. Because France feels that when these types of people are leaders, its interest in Africa will be guaranteed. And what has happened is that all this has backfired, and the younger generation is seeing France to be completely out of order in the type of interference in the leadership processes in Africa. The latest, for example, is that the president of Senegal has nominated his prime minister, Amadou Ba, to be the candidate of the ruling party. But there was no democratic process. He was handpicked by the president to be the candidate of the ruling party. And within that party, there could be other contenders, such that if the process was a democratic process,
right,
a new leadership would have emerged at the party level. So the first point is democracy has to begin from the internal competition amongst political parties,
right,
and not for the president to have total hegemony over the party that he is head of. To the extent that in the Francophone countries, you have what you call the mouvement présidentiel.
yeah,
So you have a coalition of political parties that support the president, but there is no internal democracy in this coalition. But the same can be said of opposition parties, where you have a coalition of opposition groups, except that in the example I'm giving, you realize that the main opposition party, PASTEC, has been banned by the ruling party precisely because of their capacity to organize and to have the voices of the youth come out very clearly in demand of the type of change. And so France has to change completely from the way it relates. And I'll end it on this with concrete examples.
yeah,
President Emmanuel Macron went to Chad to literally consecrate the new leader, which was not a democratic process because the constitutional order was not followed after the killing of his father.
yeah,
And so there's an ambivalence in which the same France is condemning the coup in Niger, which is not different from the coup in Chad.
right,
And if you look elsewhere, France was endorsing the third term mandate of the president of Belarus. And in West Africa, endorsing the third term mandate of the president of Cote d'Ivoire, the third term mandate of the president of Senegal. And so you have an ambivalence. And that is why I say, let us now look at coup d'etats no longer as the military takeovers, but they are the unconstitutional change of government in which when a certain elected president manipulates the constitution for a third-term mandate that benefits him,
Right.
and it is mostly him, it is also a coup d'etat. I say this with emphasis because in Accra in March 2022, we had a forum of the African Union that has now set the norm of unconstitutional changes of government to include amendments of constitutions that unfairly favor a sitting president for a third term. And in May 2022, this was now fully endorsed
Yeah.
in the Extraordinary African Union Summit in Malabo, in Equatorial Guinea, which now effectively says that coup d'etats are no longer military takeovers. They are also the takeovers in which a sitting president is clinging to power by changing the constitution. And so you refer to Dumbuye's speech.
Yeah.
His legitimacy is found in the fact that Alpha Conde was a threat to the democracy of Guinea to the extent that he insisted, despite the loss of lives, to have a third term mandate. And we see it elsewhere. And this is the way I want to put the emphasis.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of questions, but I think Nana is in. Nana, Mr. Bombadi want to congratulate you. Nana is gone. Nana is his signal is gone. Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Bombadi,
Yeah.
where is Nana? I want us to do this quick before your signal goes back. Mr. Bombadi really wants to congratulate you for a good work done. Please, Mr. Bombadi, you are please. We can please give him the congratulation note.
Yeah, Nana, you are the future of the hope of the type of governance and democracy we want in Africa. I want to congratulate you on your spirited campaign and from Ghana,
Thank,
continue to inspire and encourage you to forge ahead for the women leadership we want for our continent.
Nana, do you
Good
have?
evening, Nigerian time. I could only hear snippets at a time, and I don't know if you can hear me. Thank you so much, Mr. Bombade. I really appreciate all that you've said to me. It's people like you that give us the confidence to come out and do it all over again. I missed most of what you said, and I hope I can go back and catch, everything that you said. But I did hear where you talked about people changing constitutions to suit their own narrative. The only way that we can have democracy work for us in Africa is when we begin to indigenize it, when we make democracy work for us. I think there's this word that comes to my mind now, where we say the arrogance of the West, where they thought that they could be the ones to do the legislating for Africans, where they just come and they want to legislate laws for us without looking at the sociocultural realities of Africans in general. What we begin to see, in my view, what I've noticed, we've started to see a sort of radicalism, something that started in the late 50s into the 60s, that made people say for they wanted to have representation. They wanted to be able to represent themselves. They wanted to be able to free themselves from the autocracy of the West. But unfortunately, in the place of democracy, we now see that we have governments that have become autocratic in nature, where they don't listen to the people, where they don't even have the conscience of the people at heart. And so we still find that we're struggling with matters of poverty, we're struggling with matters of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. In Nigeria, we have a journalist who has had to flee the country. In a democracy, these things are repugnant to what we believe democracy should be. So if we want democracy to work for us, we should begin to think of how to make it ours, to suit our socio-cultural and even religious sentiments,
Right.
you know and
So now,
that's why we're beginning to see a resurgence of coups all along the
so now
Sahel region
what you are
and
saying,
other parts of Africa, because it's a form of rebellion. Abraham Lincoln. Oh, I paraphrase now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can do hear you, please. Go ahead. Nana, please go ahead. Nana, we can
You
hear
know,
you.
Abraham Lincoln did say that people should take charge of their constitutional rights. I paraphrase, this is my understanding from what he said. They should take charge of their constitutional rights. And when the government isn't working for them, you're expected to use the power belongs to.
Nana is gone off, and then I'll get her back into the system. Mr. Bombande, from all that Nana has just said, and then from what you also have articulated, does it mean that democracy is at stake in the sub region?
Absolutely. Uh, Democracy is at stake for various reasons. When incumbent governments are the very ones who undermine the tenets of the African Charter on Democracy,
But
elections,
it
and
is a, it
governance.
is,
And this is the Addis
yes,
Ababa Charter the Addis Ababa Charter. Or if you look at the 2000 Lome Declaration, if you look in our West African space, our own protocols of democracy and good governance, they literally and blatantly undermine these tenets, but amongst the peer group, nobody challenges them. And so it becomes a hegemony of the
exactly,
linkage of
exactly.
leaders who take political power, not as Nana put it, for the interest and representation of the people, but for their own interests, supported by their allies in the West. And they then perpetuate themselves in that regime. And you cannot have that system without corruption. And that is why when we talk about the corruption, it is not just the malfeasance that takes the resources of the people away from them, but it is the wealth gap that is created between the ruling elite who use political power and have linkages with all the foreign investors for their own private businesses,
In the
their
West,
and
exactly.
their extended family. And you cannot have a democracy, peace, and stability when the people see that happening. Even when they keep quiet, they will rise up and they will come with the full force of the power of the people to stop this type of leadership. And that is why we must separate the principles and values of democracy from the type of leadership we see today that is practicing democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Bombande. Nana is still gone. Mr. Bombande, did you listen to the recent speech made by our President Nanado and then also Damboya? It looks like they were great speeches that were made during the UN summit. Nana, you're back. Nana. Yes, Nana, I wanted to ask you a question and then I
Yes,
just
I am.
come
Yes,
back.
I am.
Let me
Hello.
ask you a question. Nana, let me throw it to you. I want you to have your
Yes.
Nana. From where you sit, Nana, and with all that is happening in Nigeria, you think democracy is at stake? Nana, I can hear you. Nana is gone. Okay, Mr. Bomade, we'll move to West Africa. We'll move to ECOWAS.
Yeah.
ECOWAS, with all that is happening, France intervening in our elections, to me, that's a coup d'etat. For a foreign government to intervene or to get into our democracy, that's another form of coup d'etat. What is the role of ECOWAS when it comes to things like this? I know this before Ouattara came, there was this guy called Gbagbo, and that was the first time I saw you spoke extensively about how Gbagbo should be ousted, but the UN had to come in with a certain charter before they could. But eventually, they ended up getting Gbagbo out of the system. But Ouattara is ending up doing the same thing, and it's fine. Everybody says it's fine. What is the role of ECOWAS when it comes to some of these things in some of our neighboring countries?
Well, first of all, we have to appreciate and understand ECOWAS to be our own multilateral institution. It's our own creation, and it was set up for specific objectives. Primary among these objectives is the regional integration of our economies, the supranationality that allows our peace and security to be collective, but on the principles of good governance. Because the 1999 protocol tried to look at the supranationality in terms of how when conflict is happening in one country, it does not remain in that country. It becomes a shared responsibility of all of us. The problem is we knew there were deficits in that 1999 protocol. So we went ahead with the protocol on democracy as a supplementary in 2001. And the emphasis on the supplementary is the preventive capacity of ECOWAS so that we don't get in the first place into the crisis that requires the collective response to ensure peace and stability. So what you have seen happening since 2020 is ECOWAS has itself to blame. And when I say ECOWAS, I include all of us as citizens of West Africa. ECOWAS has itself to blame for keeping mute when protocols that relate to the practice of good governance was violated from one country to the other. And ECOWAS said nothing because it went against the tenets of good governance and the practice of that good governance. Now, keep in mind that in 2015, already in Ghana, and I was in the front seat working with President John Mahama when he was the chair of ECOWAS.
Yeah.
We had initiated the process of amending the 2001 protocol to make it undesirable for any sitting president to have a third term. At that time, Gambia, Togo did not provide support. And on the working methodology of consensus building, we could not proceed. Cote d'Ivoire also was not in support of it, but they played a certain role of the doyen. They waited until the last minute to make their intentions known. Now, in 2022, again, Ghana, as chair of ECOWAS under President Nana Akufo-Addo, led in the process of the amendment. And again, this time around, Cote d'Ivoire emphatically said no, Senegal joined to say no, and Togo joined to say no. Now, what you then see happening is Cote d'Ivoire, after the summit in Abuja, had their leader, Alassane Ouattara, give a press conference to you in the media saying that everything will be done to remove the military junta in Niger. And everybody was looking at that to be ridiculous.
That's a hypocrisy. I'm surprised.
Because people saw him to be a president who is now in a third term after serving 10 years in office. So why would he be talking about the forceful removal of the military junta in Niger? So the point I'm trying to make is, if you do not respect the principles and the values of good governance as ECOWAS, you cannot succeed in forcing the principles to be respected because we don't have that capacity. And even at the time that ECOWAS was making the declaration about a forceful intervention in Niger, ECOWAS knew very well that that will not happen. But what they wanted to put across was the language that they are committed to democracy and they will not allow the continuation and the contagion of coup d'etats. But the way it was communicated made it to be so unpopular because you are communicating something you know you don't have the capacity to implement. And so you have to look at it in this light that ECOWAS is the first guilty party by refusing, and we can name the names, Alpha Conde. And again, before I joined government, I was working for the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel. I was in the front seat of all the diplomatic efforts of our own His Excellency Mohammed Ibn Chambers, who was then the special representative of the Secretary General of the UN for West Africa, ahead of the UN in West Africa, leveraging ECOWAS, working with ECOWAS for Alpha Conde to change his mind about the third term. Everybody failed. We saw what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. As recently as a few months ago,
Yeah.
we saw the massive protests in Dakar because the president of Senegal wanted to go for a third term. So many people died during those protests. During the UN General Assembly, Senegalese came out in their numbers to protest on the streets of New York, but in other cities of the Western world. So finally, President Macky Sall accepted that he cannot go for a third term. but he's still not committed to the practice of good governance because he handpicked somebody to be his successor. So the point I want to make is this: whilst all this was happening, ECOWAS kept quiet.
Yeah.
So when the military took the gun and started to overthrow governments, ECOWAS did not have the moral leverage and authority to say anything.
So, Mr. Bombande, what is the stand of AU right now? Because now AU, what's the stand on AU right now on what is happening in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso?
Now, if you look at the African security architecture built from the Constitutive Act of 2002 and gradually expanding and deepening, there is a principle of the African Union leaning on the pillars of the Union, which are the regional organizations. And so the African Union would expect that the Constitutive Act and related charter on the principles of democracy and good governance is what is also in practice at the regional level. So that when the regional organization chooses a particular trend of response, the African Union will support it.
Right,
Now, if you look at the premise that I have developed,
right,
it goes without saying that the African Union is able to be relevant in terms of the Constitutive Act and in terms of bringing the leverage of the continent if the regional organization is active, preventive in orientation, and also capable of practicing good governance. So what you see is that when it's a concern of West Africa, you see the African Union is much stronger in supporting ECOWAS.
right,
But when it is the Central African region, such as the Economic Community of Central African States, you barely do not hear the African Union because ECAS, the Economic Community of Central African States, is weak.
right.
And that's why your play of let us make noise of the
Mhm.
former president of Gabon is quite interesting because there is a sometimes it is as if there is a total sense of naivety
Right.
in which this man did not even know on which planet he is relating with in terms of being a sitting president.
Yeah.
And that's why in Chad we had the ambivalence because ECAS did nothing about Chad and the African Union did nothing. So there was a violation of that same principle of unconstitutional change of government. And so the African Union is also caught in its own web of complexity in which there are double standards. You say nothing in ECAS, but you want to say much on ECOWAS. So the African Union too has become paralyzed in
Right.
its own situation. And what you see is the call led by a revolution of people like you who are in a modern technology of communications.
Right.
It's no longer right now, you are in the United States,
Right.
you have a global audience, and we are interacting with you. Leadership has to catch up with that because that's what the young people are into. And
Right.
so the good governance is now compelling. It is now an imperative because when you and I'm saying this because one of the casualties in Gabon
Mhm.
during the elections was to cut off the internet.
Which is
Now,
wrong.
exactly, you cannot write all the details in the script, but you know that in a country that is preparing for elections up to election day, when the internet is cut off, you know there is something wrong. That happened several times in Senegal.
Right.
And that is why the leadership is not even aware of the aspirations of their own people
Right.
and where they want this continent to be led to. And there are so many other things that can relate to that. And you followed yesterday and 2 days before that. The young people were the majority in the protests in Ghana. And my advice was very simple.
Right.
If you stop them, then you are trying to block that air of frustration that would find another way to, if you call it, a shootout and that could be uncontrollable because the police will not be able to manage it. So I'm happy that the peaceful protest took place because
Right.
it is part of the practice of good governance.
Right.
Democracy insists that people should have the freedom
Right.
to protest. And my own daughter, who has been active in that process, told me that, Daddy, this is about my generation. It has nothing to do with government. It has nothing to do with the Ghana police. It has something to do with our generation. Because when we keep silent,
Right.
then we are dead.
Yeah.
When we keep silent, then we are dead.
Yeah.
So this is the man of the young people that everybody must listen to.
Right. Thank you so much. I want us to, before, after we come to Ghana, after Ghana, I'll put a map of the Sahel on the screen so that you can just give a little a summary of the kind of rebel activity that is going on. But before that, let's just conclude on Ghana. Then from there we move to the Sahel because I know you know much about the Sahel. Most of our brothers and sisters who are in the diaspora, they hardly know much about Africa. You know, they only know about the Sahara. But when it talks about the Sahel, I mean, they are fun wanting. Now, there was a recent demonstration in Ghana. You talked about it. My problem with the current administration is that you have your last year to wrap up. You have exhausted your 8 years tenure. So if the youth in Ghana wants to demonstrate, why prevent them? You have nothing to lose.
Precisely.
Does it mean that leadership have lost touch with the people, Mr.
I
Bomade?
think I think the problem of leadership in Ghana today, which has reinforced itself after quite a number of years in the administration of our current president, has been a leadership that is preoccupied with a certain image that should be seen globally, but not necessarily what they believe are the good practices of good governance, management of the economy, representing the people meaningfully that matters. And so when they have a sense of insecurity that image they want to see outside, especially when the president is at the UN General Assembly, when they become preoccupied that image will not be the image they like to be shared about Ghana, they go into a panic mode
All right.
and they commit what are called enforced errors because they are not able to be calm and to understand the values of peaceful demonstrations as part of democratic processes.
Right.
So that is one. But secondly, and I can speak like this because I've been in government.
Thank you.
I've had several situations in which I was told, Emmanuel, you were always understood to be very critical, not necessarily of the party that you are affiliated with, because you are critical also of the party you are affiliated with. You are critical because you came from the background of civil society before you even went to the UN. And so President Mahama often would tell me, Emmanuel, I did not bring you into government to praise me. You must have the courage to help me be a good leader.
Right.
I use that example of myself to say that the second problem about our current leadership in Ghana is that though the president has so many people around him, none of them has the audacity to engage with him on what must be done right.
Right.
I traveled a lot with our president, and when we take off on a plane, I would go with my briefing notes with a file and
Right.
sit in front of him and brief him and hand over my file to him and say that, Your Excellency, from the foreign ministry, this is our thinking. And I do that collegially. I bring in the directors of the various directorates. And depending on where the president is going, I get their input from the technocratic and objective analysis of what should draw the attention of the president. And
Right.
he will thank me and he will say, when I go through the file, if I have questions, I'll come back to you. That is leadership. We are lacking that.
Yes.
And so we've been managing an image that in itself has not been able to be a good image precisely because the president gradually and incrementally though surrounded by many people, has actually been isolated and alone.
Yeah. I, I,
And
I
that
think I will
is
nominate you to be part of the Council of State in the next administration because it looks like people like you is what we want to champion such causes.
unfortunately, the Council of State has been leading into the chair group rather than helping the president to be a good and keep in mind that every good president of Ghana is a good president not because of the party he leads, but the people of Ghana. And we are just about 31 million people. Endowed, we are the number one country in Africa as a gold producer. We are number 6 in the world. Since we discovered oil, we've brought in more than 8 billion US dollars. Nobody can complain about the lack of resources for Ghana.
Right.
It is the leadership crisis and the poor leadership that is making this happen. And whereas in our executive system of governance, the ball stops
On
on the desk of the president, everybody because our executive system is such that everybody who is an appointee of the president is an advisor to the president.
right.
So I begin by even saying that those who are appointees of the president are the biggest failures, though the president is the one who has to take all the responsibility.
Right.
And that for me is the sad reality. And for your listeners,
Yes.
particularly from Ghana,
Yeah.
if they want, they can go and search on what used to be Twitter and is now X. When we were handing over power in 2017, President Mahama tweeted that I want all my appointees, and myself included,
Right.
and that's why I'm referring to it. We now have a new president. You must bring your knowledge, your support to this new president because his success
Right.
would be the success of the whole of Ghana. And he kept faith to that. When we entered the pandemic, he appointed a technocratic committee from our side to now go and work and support the president and his team. They were immediately dismissed as ridiculous. Who says that we need your help? That has been the crisis of leadership.
In
In
Africa
which,
and also in
and
Ghana.
yes, and I don't want it to sound as if I'm blaming NPP.
No.
If NDC orchestrates a leadership in which NDC thinks that NPP is not important, it's the same crisis.
Right.
But at least in NDC, we have seen that there is a certain spirit of consultation for consensus building. People forget that NDC did not go to the IMF without consulting with the NPP
Right.
through the Senchi consensus, in which though the NPP officially boycotted it, there were renowned economists, NPP founders like Kwame Pianim, who inputted and contributed.
Right.
Now, when you have that collegial consensus, consultative type of leadership, every president will be a good president because the support then comes across party lines. But when you act as if to say that we know it all,
Yeah.
we have a narrative, we are the only people who can make this country better, all of you were jokers, you end the way we have ended. So it's a lesson also for future governance.
Right.
Anybody who is in leadership in the future, you only happen to have been elected, but you now move beyond your party and you become a president for the whole of Ghana.
Right.
And maybe a woman would be the one to give that kind of example when we have a first woman president.
Yeah. Mr. Bombande, in fact, it's been so interesting getting you to talk. And can I have you back on this show so that we can zero in more on the Ghanaian politics? Because most of the African Americans really want to come down to Ghana, and we are here projecting Ghana, but still want to know whether if their investments will be safe if they try to invest. So I would like to have you back. I'll speak to Carlos Caloni, my producer, and then we'll rearrange and then we'll have a one-on-one. And so that we can spend almost about 45 minutes to talk much about politics in Ghana. But before you leave, I want you to just give us a brief summary about the region, the Sahel region. I know you are really good at that. I have just placed the photograph on the screen. And I hope you can see the screen, Mr. Bombande.
Yes, I can see it clearly.
Yes, the Sahel, that's where all this conflict is taking place. And then I just wanted to just give a brief summary about all the activities that is taking place over there so that next time I can have you back onto the show so that you can just tell us what is the genesis of rebel activities in the Sahel region.
I'll try to be brief,
Thank you.
but to do that, let me send us back to 2011.
Right.
The crisis in Libya was reaching its peak. The African Union succeeded in a mediated effort to have a 2-year transition in which Muammar Gaddafi, the president, then accepted, and he agreed he would exclude himself in future elections, but he wants his political movement to still stay active. Now, if you recall, the last effort to, if you describe it as let that agreement be consummated, never happened because the team of African leaders who were now to fly from Nouakchott in Mauritania to Tripoli was threatened by NATO that they cannot guarantee their air safety. And so that final mission of the African Union was aborted. But
Right.
let me, I'll give that quick background to say that by 2012, all the Tuareg rebels who were fighting on the side of Muammar Gaddafi,
Right.
once, once the NATO bombings had obliterated Tripoli and Gaddafi then was killed by elements of the different rebellious groups, these Tuareg rebels simply turned around with their brand new Hilux 4x4, or what you call in the United States SUVs,
Yes.
with, with mounted brand new machine guns into the Sahara, which is on the map.
Right.
They then reignited the war, which was a long held grievance between the Tuaregs in the north and the government of Mali in Bamako. And their argument was very simple, that the North has always been marginalized and has been excluded from Mali, though they belong to the Republic of Mali. And this will be the reason why in the 2015 Algiers Agreement, which has not been implemented, part of it is how do you make the northern part of Mali an economic zone of priority to bring equilibrium in social and economic investment.
Right.
But the point is this, and that is the argument I want to put forward in my summary. The Tuaregs did not know that they will be infiltrated by terrorist groups
Okay.
because violent extremism started to emerge. Number one, violent extremism associated with the demise of Gaddafi,
Okay.
violent extremism associated with what had happened with ISIS infiltrating across even the Tuareg groups and elements in the Sahara. And these terrorist groups will now take over from the Tuareg rebels and take the war down south on extremist ideologies. Now, the Malian army was never built to fight anybody. The Malian army was the preserve of the elite Malians who only saw positions to be jobs for their sons and daughters, including even the son of Ibrahim Keita,
Right.
who rose to a high position and was seen to be completely corrupt. And I can see Nana is back, so I'm going to end because she might have contributions to make.
And
And to that extent, that terrorist element now made the Sahel to be what it is up to where we are. And I could have then gone on to talk about how it has impacted on governance and it is making governance impossible.
right.
And rather than a collective response from us all in ECOWAS, we left the Sahelian countries on their own and we're now paying the price for what has happened.
Nana, I'm going to give you the answer.
Yes, at least I hope I can just chip in a few words. I'm listening. Thank you. Oh Lord. We've lost contact again. Hello.
Yes. So if you were to continue from where I left off, when you now have extremist groups motivated by high levels of ideological underpinnings, they now take bad governance as a good excuse to launch their jihad. For example,
Yeah.
in Mali, the legislative elections were literally rigged, in which opposition candidates, there were courts that annulled their results, and the outcomes rather replaced them with candidates of the ruling party. So you see a legitimate cause for terrorist groups to use the conflict between farmers and herders,
Right.
in which the herders, most of them Fulani, were seen to be outsiders. And so the terrorist groups would see them to be the entry of a war to protect their interests. But in actual fact, it is to spread their Islamic ideology.
Yeah.
And so you can go on, and you see how the sub-region then became vulnerable
Right.
to bad governance policies that then became a legitimate grievance that
Right.
terrorists would use to make the Sahel region ungovernable.
Nana, I would this let me just do it quick with Nana. Nana, can you hear me loud and clear? Nana. Oh man, Nana is gone. Nana is gone. All right. Mr. Bombande, I just want to say thank you so much. Nana, I think I'll have to rearrange with Nana. And then because we need to know what is happening in Nigeria. We need to know because both African Americans want to invest in the sub region. Yeah. Nana, can you hear me? Nana, Nana, can you hear me? Nana, Nana, can you hear me? I think Nana's signal is bad. So, Mr. Bombande, I want to say thank you so much for your precious time. I will send my team to see you so that. But periodically, I will have to call personally so that we can have some of these discussions in camera. And then I can reframe some of my questions so that we can go deep into what is happening in Africa because we are all worried. If
Yeah.
the whole world is worried, look, if Africa crashes, that's the end of the world.
Yeah.
If Africa crashes, that's the end of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Martin Petigo, and then let me just okay, so let's do this. My name is Martin Petigo, and today's Political Affairs second season. We all know Mr. Bombande. He's our big brother, our uncle, our grandpa. You know, he has a lot of stuff, a lot of information, and he's come to really do justice to some of the questions. Our main questions, our mind-blowing questions for what is happening in the Sahel region, what is democracy in Africa, whether it's at stake, etc., etc. But he has spelled out all the reasons, and I believe that today has been a very successful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to stay tuned to this program, this channel, Mozatus Media. We telecasting straight from United States, PA, Colma, and next week, stay tuned for another episode of Political Affairs. God bless you all. I'm gonna call you over. I'm gonna call you after the show so that we can have discussions.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. That was Mr. Bombay. Right. Thank you so much, all of you, for spending time with us on this podcast. Stay tuned next week. There is a show.